You get 5 athletes in any sport out of who played here in New York. Who makes your list?
My number 5, Babe Ruth. The name says it all. I don't even have to fight it. Greg, come see me. I know you say he's overrated. Come see me. I'll talk to you too. But Babe Ruth is number 5 on my Mount Rushmore of New York athletes, if we're calling it that.
Okay.
My number 4, Henrik Lundqvist. One of the best all-time goalies in New York history. We can give honorable mention to Mike Richter for winning the 94 Cup. We can give honorable mention to other greats from New York in hockey, but when you talk about Ranger hockey in our lifetime or any lifetime, it'll be Henrik Lundqvist, the king. He didn't get a cup, but you can't blame him. He's only one player. My number 3 is Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing, one of the best centers I've ever seen play. Just amazing the way.
Are you about to cry for Patrick Ewing?
I'm never going to cry for a player. I'm not Marcus Lamar. I'm not Brandon Falco. I don't cry for players. But I will tell you, Patrick Ewing, the popularity, the intensity he brought to the court, if only he had dunked it and didn't try to finger roll, they could have had a championship. But listen, that's my number 3. My number 2 and my number 1 come from my arch nemesis, the New York Yankees. My number 2 is Derek Jeter, all-time best shortstop ever to play, ever, in my eyes. And my number 1, Enter the Sandman, Mariano Rivera. You cannot debate him not being on this list, but not being number 1. Nobody was more lights out than Mariano Rivera. And that's right, I didn't pick Joe Namath. I didn't pick Tom Seaver. I didn't pick anybody on my team in regard besides Henrik Lundqvist and Patrick Ewing, because you have to remember what's great. And
Okay,
those are some great.
so Mike goes with Babe Ruth, Lundqvist, Ewing, Jeter, and Mo. But Mike, you picked 3. You're a Met fan picking 3 Yankees. The irony here. All time. You went with 3 Yankees.
If I wanted to, listen, I've gotten flack for being homer picks. If I wanted to, I could have said Mike Piazza. I could have said David Wright. I could have picked players, but I'm being realistic. If we're talking sports and we're talking all time, you can't knock the hustle. You can't knock the hustle. And
Respect.
The hustle that Derek Jeter had, the hustle Mariano had, I never wanted to play Mo. If we were in the 9th inning and we had a lead, or we were losing and Mo was coming in, I turned the TV off.
Okay, fair. So Ziggy Zig, co-founder of the Hit List, my brother. You got your 5, start at number 5. Who are you going? All-time New York athletes. Who cracks your list?
All right, all-time New York athletes. Mike already said a couple of them, so I guess I'm just gonna go with that. He mentioned Mariano Rivera.
So that's your number 5.
Well, yeah, number 5. I'm going with Mariano Rivera. I don't have a exactly ranked order, but these are my top 5.
Well, try to rank them as you go along, if you can.
Well, if you want me to
listen,
rank,
man, you gotta move on. Zay, you gotta be ready, man. You the
no, I'm ready.
man.
I'm ready. I'm always ready. I'm ready. It's Callhead now telling you, oh, you got to make sure you rank them. Like, no,
because that's the best thing to do. You gotta rank. You gotta rank, brother.
Screw all of that.
Looks like he's eating chicken wings. He's licking his lips. Ready. He's ready.
I'm ready to go. And Carl gonna try to change the game on me like you changed the game with this remix bullshit. But
man, it's not bullshit. Shit, things have to be done right. We got to do things right, man. Go ahead.
Let's get back because Mac and Kenny need to go. All right, so I'm gonna go with Mariano Rivera. All right, that's my 5th pick right there. Number 4, I'm going with Derek Jeter. Right, like I said, I'm going off for all the guys that Mike picked. I don't need to go ahead and repeat everything that he said. Right, 5-time champion, both of them were MVPs. And like, what guy, Derek Jeter? What guy do you know gets a standing ovation at Fenway? Like, no one does. No one gets that. So I'm going with Derek Jeter. I'm going with Mariano Rivera. Now, I'm going to go with Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing. Nobody ever talks about the fact that Patrick Ewing made it to the NBA, not NBA Finals. Patrick Ewing played in the playoffs 1990, 91, 92, 93, 94. Went to the playoffs 5 times. And each team that he lost to ended up winning the NBA championship. So I got to give it to Patrick Ewing. Definitely got to give it to him. Played on both sides of the ball. Had a love-hate relationship with the fans, but we really started to love him after he was gone. Right. The next individual that I want to go with, right? Henrik. I'm going with the King. One of the best individuals for the New York Rangers. I remember reading newspapers, the Daily News as a kid about him. I used to read the newspapers from back to front just so I could read the sports section, right? NBA, MLB, NHL. Henrik, definitely giving it up to him. And my last individual that I'm definitely going with. Didn't start playing football until the 11th grade. probably the greatest linebacker of all time, Lawrence Taylor. I'm going with Lawrence Taylor. All right. Champion, a defensive player of the year multiple times, multiple champion, I should say that, right? And the coaches had to change their whole schemes for this guy. You know what I'm saying? Like the whole offensive line, specifically the tackles, they had to change because they weren't fast enough to keep up with Lawrence Taylor. This guy had everything: aggression, speed, power. He had it all. Number 56. I'm going with that.
Okay, so we have Mo, Jeter, Ewing, Lundqvist, and Lawrence Taylor. TK the Tank, you're on the clock. Top 5 starting at number 5.
Top 5 starting number 5. This is pretty tough, and I may have stretched myself out a bit thin trying to get players from every sport that played in New York. Honorable mention to Bruno Sammartino, who I almost put on here because he headlined Madison Square Garden 188 times.
Wow.
So honorable mention to that man. But
I'm with it.
5, number 5, though, I'm going to go with Mike Bossy. 1979 to 1983, the Islanders had a dynasty. They owned hockey. They won 4 championships. And Mike Bossy, he was the Iron Man. He was the MVP of the playoffs in 1982. He rarely missed any time on the ice, and he led that Islanders team. So I want to give a shout out to him at number 5 for being just so dominant. Number 4, I'm going to go. I was afraid. I was between Patrick Ewing and Walt Frazier, and I was really nervous because Frazier had those 2 championships, but I wanted to pick Patrick, and I'm glad I've seen the last 2 before me pick Patrick, because as a kid being born in 1990, watching Patrick Ewing just play basketball in the NBA in the 90s was so much fun. You know, hearing that opening theme and everything, just getting pumped up for the
Best theme in sports, baby. Yep.
Oh, it was the best. They made the playoffs for 12 straight years between 1988 and 2000, and you cannot look at anyone else but Patrick Ewing for that. And a couple plays go a different way. John Starks has a better quarter than he could have that championship. I didn't want to leave Patrick off for that, so Patrick's my number 4. Number 3, I'm going to go with it's funny he's at number 3 because he is one of the greatest of all time, is Mariano Rivera. You think about Mariano and you think about him bursting onto the scene with the New York Yankees and how many records he would go on to break. And it's amazing to think that he started out at 25 years old, making his first major league debut, his first game as a starting pitcher, and didn't become a full-time closer until 1997. So you're talking about a guy who started closing full-time in 1997 and broke all the records and set the bar for what it means to be a closer. A great New York athlete, one of the best of all time. It cannot be denied. Now, my number 1 and number 2 really are, I believe, interchangeable. But if we're going with athlete, I'm going to give number 1 to a different guy. So number 2, I'm going to give to Jackie Robinson and the Brooklyn Dodgers. Breaking the color barrier, winning an MVP, winning a championship with the Dodgers. He didn't have a long career, much like like Mariano Rivera starting late. Jackie Robinson also started late, but he changed the whole game. There's a reason when you walk into Citi Field, you walk into the Jackie Robinson Rotunda, and there's a reason 42 was retired throughout all of baseball. What he did is it can't be diminished what he did, and he did it as a New York player in the Brooklyn Dodgers. So for that, he gets my number 2 spot. But when you talk about athlete, if we're talking about the top 5 athletes, there's no more of a freak athlete, an absolute game changer, a guy who wrecked the game than Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor won 2 Super Bowls, 132 and a half sacks lifetime for the Giants, second only to Michael Strahan. And he was just, you couldn't stop this guy. This guy in the 80s and 90s just struck fear into his opponents. You can look, he had a hairline fracture in his right tibia. He got against San Francisco in 1987. He played the next week. He broke a bone in his foot in 1989. He only took 1 week off. You couldn't keep Lawrence Taylor off the field. He was one of the best athletes to ever step foot on the football field. That's why he won an MVP as a defensive player, which we all know is extremely hard. Only 2 men have done it. So for me, if you're looking at athletes in New York, the number 1 athlete has to be LT.
So we go with Mike Bossy, Ewing, Mo, Jackie Robinson, and Lawrence Taylor. Mac, I love the background, man. Can't stop, won't stop. Invented the remix. Coach, the floor is yours.
You know, it's tough to go last when you got a list like this because a lot of us, like you said, we're gonna repeat, but I think some of us got the different orders. I was happy to see Tom throwing Jackie Robinson because I'll go into where I have him and why I have it, but I don't argue with that 1-2. Like the argument with when you go athlete, Lawrence Taylor, and if you go just overall, who changed, you know, the entire landscape of baseball in terms of the color barrier, you got to go Jackie. But we're gonna start with my number 5, and that's Babe Ruth. You know, I'm going Babe Ruth. People say he's overrated. You only could play who you play. You only could play in the era that you represent.
Say
You
that
know, you
louder,
can't-
coach. Say that
You
louder.
can't. You only could play who you play. I mean, here's the thing that I say to people when you say overrated because of the era. Well, why wasn't everyone else doing it then? If it's a bad era, everyone else should be hitting the same amount of home runs.
If it's
If
easy,
he's
then
under
we're
it-
home run kings.
You know what I mean? Like if it was the era, Joe Schmo would have had 500, 659 home runs in a career, but they didn't because they were not Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth, you know, I don't care if they made it up when he pointed out the stadium and then he hit the next home run. It sounds good. It's good in every movie. I loved it. Babe Ruth, he changed the game. He gave us the home run. He was a pitcher, cursed to all Boston sports for hundreds of years. Yeah, Carl, I'm throwing your Celtics in there. All Boston sports were cursed because of trading Babe Ruth. So
That's
Babe
cool.
Ruth,
That's
he's
cool.
my number 5 in terms of greatest athletes. Then we got to go another Yankee great, Lou Gehrig. You know, what Lou Gehrig brought to the game, who he was as a person, you know, what he battled. You get what I'm saying? Like, you can't, that's what New York is about. If you can survive here, you can survive everywhere. He was excellent on the field. He was a great hitter. You know what I'm saying? He was just the quintessential what New Yorkers are about in terms of who we live our lives like. And he gave us one of the most iconic speeches ever in sports history. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to go Lou Gehrig at number 4. Number 3 to me, Mariano Rivera, the Sandman. You know, I couldn't quite put him number 1 because I hate to say it and I don't want to disrespect relief pitchers. But when you're looking at guys like LT and Jackie Robinson, who are playing both sides week in and week out, when we go athlete, I got to bring Mariano down a little notch, you know, because he was a relief pitcher, but he's the greatest relief pitcher. And that's why he becomes number 3 on my list in terms of New York athletes. Set the bar. You know, he does an amazing job in the community as well, what he does with his organizations. But when he came in, like Mike said, when he came in his prime, it was over. It was, you pretty much just, you don't care who you had coming up to bat. You pretty much just turn your TV off and say, Yankees got it. You got what I'm saying? And then when they started using him for 2 innings in those tough games, he was coming in the 8th, and then in the playoffs off a short rest, where he just pitched 2 innings the night before, and he was going to pitch again another 2 innings to close out the series. Come on, that was unheard of. You know what I mean? He had great setup men, but Mariano Rivera revolutionized, you know, what we thought of that position. The Sandman enters. He's at my number 3. Number 2 for me, because of what I put into perspective, is going to be LT. The guy did it on coke. He did it on coke. He was coked up every week, and the guy was out there. And did you see him in Any Given Sunday?
Oh
Any
yeah.
Given Sunday? Come on, we gonna forget about what he did in Any Given Sunday. Listen, LT he's like the Mike Tyson of the NFL. This guy was hired up every week. You knew what he was doing. Well, I know you know this, Tom, because I don't remember the player. Who did he break the dude's leg? Who was that
Joe
guy?
Theismann.
Joe Theismann?
Theismann.
Joe Theismann,
Yeah.
get him out of here. He made Joe Theismann's leg look like a wrestling figure that you buy from the 99-cent store. It was a wrap. LT was bugging out. Nobody, like they said, he revolutionized the position. He revolutionized the formation for the way defense is played, the way they let their linebackers just run loose and do whatever the heck they want. All the Ray Lewises of the world, they got to thank that man for what he did. He got linebackers paid. Let's not forget that too. What he did got linebackers for the future, those $1 million contracts. So we got to give it up to LT. I'm a Giants fan. You know, gave me some championships where I couldn't remember because I was too young, but I still talk up and brag about those, just like all those other team sports brag about championships from the 70s, you know?
Like the Celtics.
So, yeah, so we ain't
The
going to talk about
60s,
that.
get it right.
So my last but not least, Jackie Robinson, you know, what he did for the sport. Sometimes some athletes, I'm going to change my tone here in terms of reverence. Sometimes what some athletes do off the field supersede what they do on the field in terms of their allure. He was a great player as well. So let me not knock down his play on the field. He was an excellent player. He just didn't have a long-term lifespan in terms of his peak at the game. But what he went through, what he did to pave the way in terms of the breaking the color barrier and opening up so for so many other players, if it's not just black players, we're talking about without Jackie Robinson, there's no Hispanic players. You know, we're talking about the Dominican players, you know, Hispanic players from the DR. All those greats wouldn't be able to come if he had not paved the way. You know, the Roberto Clementes of the world, those guys would not have been able to come to the MLB So Jackie Robinson, for that and that alone, was my greatest New York athlete.